chairman and a board director of Rio Tinto will resign over the Juukan Gorge disaster. Senior business correspondent Peter Ryan joins us now from Sydney. Pete, good day. Take us through what's happened.
Well, good morning, Joe. I mean, this is an absolutely gobsmacking story when you think about it, how the destruction of 46,000-year-old caves did get to the top of the Rio Tinto board. Of course, they should have, but it just demonstrates what happens further down in the company doesn't necessarily make it to the top. So Simon Thompson, Rio Tinto's chairman, he is going to be stepping down, and he won't be seeking re-election as a non-executive director at the miners' annual general meeting coming up next year. But he was facing a lot of pressure from shareholders and environmental activists that he needed to take personal responsibility over the board's handling of the destruction of these caves. And in a statement that Rio Tinto issued to the stock exchange this morning, Mr. Thompson said that he was ultimately accountable for the failings that led to the tragic event. So it's a pretty big toll. Rio Tinto's chief executive, Jean-Sebastian Jacques, had already quit, and a few other executives had gone over what could only be described as a corporate debacle, how the wishes and the will of the Indigenous community were ignored over this. So incredibly damaging for Rio Tinto's reputation, and is going to be taking a very long time for Rio to rebuild that.
Take us back through what happened, the timeline of what happened with the Juukan Gorge caves.
Well, Rio Tinto initially had said that they had mapped out plans to blow up these caves in consultation with Indigenous communities, and that had been, really contested, as we saw in parliamentary inquiries in the wake of the destruction of these caves. Rio Tinto last year, I recall saying that they had laid the explosives to blow up these mines, and that it was going to be too dangerous to uninstall those explosive devices, which once again to mere amateurs out there in the world of geology and mining just sounds also unbelievable. But the
so
destruction,
when did this happen, Pete?
This was a couple of years ago,
right?
And it all went ahead, even though there had been personal guarantees given to Indigenous communities that their views would be respected. And so this ultimately went right to the top of Rio Tinto. After the destruction, it sparked a range of inquiries. We've seen also other mining companies like BHP being dragged into this reputational issue. They've had to go and rewrite some of their environmental policies as well to ensure that they don't fall into the same trap as Rio Tinto. So incredibly damaging for them, and they're now going to be on the hunt for a new chairman, and they've just got a new chief executive put in place. And his role now is to rebuild trust in the community, and also with regulators and politicians in Canberra. So a very long way to go for Rio Tinto.
And Peter, this story has only just broken, and so you've only had an opportunity to look at this briefly. But what can you tell us about what's happened with compensation? Has there been any talk of compensation to the Indigenous people there, and what's the rethinking there's gone around mining companies' approach to identifying and ensuring sacred sites are protected?
Well, I understand that Rio Tinto is in the midst of working on that compensation front with Indigenous communities. Obviously, a very complex process, but also finding some way of somehow restoring these caves, and that sounds to me like a very, very big job. But really, when you look at corporate governance and transparency, we have the case of Rio Tinto, where major issues such as the destruction of 46,000-year-old caves didn't make it to the top. And it compares with Crown, for example, that we're seeing at the moment, where major issues such as money laundering or links to organised crime or exposure to organised crime weren't necessarily managed from the board. So it says a fair bit about the transparency and governance and accountability of a company board. So they'll be sending a bit of a shiver through boardrooms right around the country.
And Peter, it's terrible what happened with the loss of that Indigenous heritage. Separate to that, what has been the performance of Rio since then? Did the Rio share price suffer at all, or has the company financially not really suffered at all from this?
Well, financially, the iron ore prices have been surging over the last year or so. So big miners like Rio Tinto and also BHP and Fortescue have been really surging. So you have to, separate the financial performance of the company. But, major shareholders and institutional shareholders have been very, very concerned about the way this particular issue has been managed. They have already made their views known to the company and will certainly be making their views known at the next annual general meeting. And so Rio Tinto and Simon Thompson moving ahead of that AGM to ensure that there's not a shareholder backlash, but you'd have to imagine that there would be very big questions asked by shareholders of all sizes about the way that Rio has managed this.
And Peter, what else can you tell us about the chair who's announced that he's going to be stepping down, announced today? He won't be stepping down until next year, will he? No,
that's right. He's stepping down, but effectively, he'll be a lame duck chairman until he's finally gone. But he has made the point that he will not be seeking re-election at the annual general meeting, and so now Rio Tinto has the task of getting that hunt underway to get a replacement right at the top. So effectively, a clean out in Rio Tinto, chairman, chief executive, the big casualties and other executives that have gone as a result of this issue and debacle and disrespect to Indigenous communities.
Yeah. And Pete, as I mentioned, this story has only just broken, so you've only had an opportunity to look at it basically. But can you tell us any more about Simon Thompson, his history at Rio, how the company has performed under him and his business history before then?
Yeah, look, I don't have too much information on Simon Thompson, Joe, but he's clearly an experienced person. He's inherited the problems with these caves. Whether or not he knew, we don't know how far up all those messages went. But ultimately, boards have to take responsibility for situations like this and do what they have to do to compensate those communities and to rebuild their reputation and trust and confidence from regulators and shareholders.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Business Editor Peter Ryan.